Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to this broadcast meeting linking teachers across New South Wales. This morning you will hear reports from our senior officers and, most importantly, participate in the decisions to be made for the next stages of this campaign. I'm Sally Edsall, Media and Communications Officer. We begin this broadcast with a pre-recorded discussion with Senior Vice President Joan Lemire and President Maury Mulheron. We will then hear an update of events which have happened since that discussion, and finally Maury will move the recommendation. Maury, why are members across New South Wales meeting?
The New South Wales Government has proposed the most far-reaching restructure of the department in its history, which, if they can get away with it, will have devastating consequences for the provision of public education in New South Wales. There is so much under threat: permanent positions, the incremental pay scale, class sizes, transfer rights, the provision of support for students with special needs, non-school-based teachers in state and regional offices, and even the number of executive and specialist teachers in every school. This is why the Federation is calling this campaign Salaries, Staffing and Security. But given the enormity of the proposed changes, there have been very few details released publicly and almost no consultation with the profession, even though the department has been developing the plans for months.
So why is the government keen to do this?
In his first state budget last year, the New South Wales Treasurer announced the government's intention to reduce public sector expenditure by $10 billion over the next 4 years and reduce the size of the public service by over 5,000 positions. Teachers will be well aware of this cost cutting by Treasury because of the 2.5 salary cap the government imposed. In the same budget, the Treasurer announced the government's intention to develop a restructuring of the New South Wales Department under the guise of providing more authority to schools at the local level. This was announced as an example of economic and fiscal reform. Note, fiscal, not educational reform.
Joan, can you outline the role of the government's Commission of Audit in achieving their goal of cutting public services?
Yes, Sally. The Commission of Audit was set up to provide advice on how this could be achieved. Local schools, local decisions is a key policy in the government's agenda to slash public services by cutting jobs, employment conditions and saving billions at the expense of essential services to our communities. The Commission identified what they called problems with industrial arrangements in the New South Wales public sector. Each of the so-called problems relate to the security provided by awards and industrial agreements which are negotiated with unions. The problems, according to the Commission, are that these negotiated agreements limit managerial prerogative.
Maury, where does local schools, local decisions fit into all this?
The New South Wales Treasurer also complained that the government needed a mechanism, a structure, to deliver savings to Treasury right across the public service. Local schools, local decisions is the way that the Department of Education intends to deliver the savings.
Joan, what are some of the areas identified for change affecting teachers' working lives?
The Local Schools, Local Decisions fact sheets put out by the Department identify salary progression, performance management and principal classification, as well as the number and roles of staff within schools as areas they intend to change. These matters are covered by the award or industrial agreements, which can currently be enforced by the Industrial Relations Commission.
Are there already any examples of the sort of changes wanted?
Yes, Sally. Earlier this year we saw an attempt by the department to unilaterally change PARs. The plan was withdrawn because it breached the award. The department has indicated that TARs, EARs and PARs need to be changed. If these changes are like the attempted PARs change, they will be imposed, not negotiated, and workload will increase.
And what about salaries?
Local Schools, Local Decisions states that salary progression will be based on the attainment of professional standards. Despite our questions, the department hasn't described how this might work. We know the Commission of Audit has recommended that salary progression should be the mechanism for recognising only high or exceptional performance. This makes us ask, what will this mean? Will it be an attempt to place limits or even quotas on the number of teachers who meet the standards?
Is it true to say that staffing is at the heart of this plan?
Absolutely. Essentially, this is what it is all about. Issues to do with procurement and reducing red tape are just distractions designed to obscure the real intent. The central purpose of local schools, local decisions, is to create a cheaper workforce in our schools. Not content with imposing a 2.5 salary cap, they want to achieve much more significant savings over time and forever. It is about the number of people employed in the department, how much they are paid and what positions they hold. Under local schools, local decisions, the only mandated positions in a school will be principal and classroom teacher.
So let me get this right. No other position will be required in a school?
That's right. There'll be no mandated executive positions such as assistant principal, head teacher or deputy principal, or specialist positions such as teacher librarian, STLA, counsellors, careers advisors and so on. This has been confirmed in discussions with the department and reflects the documentation already released. The number of teachers, the positions they hold, will be determined solely by the principal, not according to a formula based on enrolments and curriculum, but according to a staffing budget. Money, not student needs, will be the ultimate determinant of a staffing mix in any school. The staffing budget will be determined and controlled centrally by Treasury and the department, and principals will be in the invidious position of having to make difficult choices about staffing their schools on the amount of dollars remaining in the staffing budget. And ultimately, the quality of what we can deliver for our students will be compromised. Staffing guarantees and class size agreements translates into curriculum guarantees and learning support for our students. These guarantees are under threat.
I was a primary school teacher for 9 years, and I've just done the retraining to be a school counsellor, so I'm qualified as both a teacher and a psychologist, and I'm really concerned that under this new scheme that the principal and schools won't actually have to employ school counsellors anymore to cater for the needs of the students.
I'm an English head teacher in a rural high school of about 340 students. I'm concerned about the proposal and the effect that it's going to have on rural schools and their communities, considering the fact that head teachers may not even exist under this current proposal.
Well, as a primary teacher librarian, I am concerned about the loss of positions, such as mine, and of course secondary teacher librarian positions. In addition to that, I am also concerned about the resourcing of libraries, that should cuts occur, that the libraries will be impacted upon in that area of resourcing.
But it was claimed that this is about principal or school autonomy.
It has nothing whatsoever to do with school autonomy. It is really about school uncertainty. As a senior accountant at Deloitte said recently at a forum on Gonski, when I hear school autonomy and flexibility, I hear uncertainty. It is not about students, it is about dollars. Devolution is not in itself grounded in education theory. It originated as an economic theory some decades ago to be applied specifically to public sector management. It is designed to protect government from public anger by retaining centralised control over revenue, but forcing local managers to have to make the tough decisions on what their organisation can afford.
What will this mean for school principals?
Principals will be placed in impossible situations. As researchers into school autonomy at Curtin University argue, it will change not just what principals do, but who they are. We will see less emphasis on educational leadership in principal selection criteria and more emphasis on business acumen. Essentially, the role will be redefined into that of a business manager. The workload of principals will increase exponentially, and this will impact on every member of the school community: students, fellow teachers, support staff and parents.
I'm a secondary principal from Sydney, and I am very concerned about local schools, local decisions. I'm concerned that I'm going to have to make decisions about specialist teachers, a librarian versus a counsellor, which one am I going to have, or whether in the future it's going to be a decision between a classroom teacher, class sizes and specialist teachers.
I'm concerned that in the future there won't be regulated pupil-teacher ratios. Therefore, I'm worried that I'll have to raise class sizes kindergarten, year 1 and year 2 to meet staff costs, and I won't have an adequate budget to pay teachers.
Maury, what are your concerns for the capacity of the public education system to recruit and retain university graduates?
For the future of the profession, it would be hard to develop a worse policy mix. We know what works to recruit people into teaching and to retain them. Permanency, a professional salary, an incremental pay scale that recognises their commitment and developing experience, an executive structure that provides opportunities for career advancement, and a transfer system recognising difficult to staff areas. These are the very things that we know attract and retain people in our profession. They are the very things under threat from this policy.
What does the department mean by allowing a mix of permanent and temporary teachers?
The department is saying that schools will be permitted to have temporary positions counted within the school staffing establishment. In other words, when permanent positions become vacant, instead of replacing that person with another permanent teacher, it can be filled by a temporary teacher in perpetuity. That means the loss of a permanent position from the system, the beginning of casualisation of the workforce.
Does this mean that a person starting their teaching career as a temp might never get a permanent job?
That's exactly right. They could end up working a series of casual and temporary engagements, one after the other, indefinitely. And in terms of the staffing budget, over time they could become too expensive and priced out of work.
My biggest concern is job security. As teachers in a statewide system, if there's no effective transfer system across the state, what happens if student numbers drop in our school? Are we just let go?
I'm a teacher with 40 years experience. The last 2 years have been casual, and I'm concerned that that experience will now be costed out at the expense of the school budget.
As a new scheme teacher, I'm concerned that I won't ever be able to achieve a permanent teaching position, and that at the end of every school year I'll need to wait in the hope that I'll be employed the following year.
Deputy President Gary Zadkovich reports further on staffing policy, transfers and how the government's policy attacks permanency.
I'm standing in the Federation's auditorium where our council of 300 members from around the state meets on a Saturday twice a term. These councillors represent you in determining the union's policies and campaign action. As you know, staffing policy is at the core of the government's local schools, local decisions, cost-cutting, deregulation agenda. While we have negotiated an extension till term 4 of the staffing agreement, the current system is at grave risk of being dismantled. Whether we achieve a new agreement will very much depend on Federation members' contribution to the campaign over the coming months. Service and incentive transfers encourage teachers to work in harder to staff schools in country areas and Western Sydney. These schools can be challenging and complex, and many are isolated from key services in harsh environments. Their students must have the same right to be taught by qualified teachers as their counterparts in schools on the coast. Service transfers provide professional opportunities to work in different locations and benefit schools through the infusion of new ideas and practice. Compassionate transfers support teachers with particular medical and welfare needs. And targeted programs provide permanent employment opportunities for teachers working in casual and temporary positions. The current system balances local selection with transfers and other centralised appointments. 60% of classroom teacher positions are currently filled by school choice from the suite of options, which gives the lie to the political line being run by the government and some in the media. Local schools, local decisions aims to further diminish and dismantle this system on the ridiculous assumption that 2,200 schools can compete equally in a staffing market. Brewarrina with Ballina? Claymore with Clovelly? Yeah, sure. Beyond the threat to a curriculum guarantee provided by qualified teachers to students, the very notion of permanent employment is now in jeopardy. Permanency is a crucial incentive for the teaching profession. It provides a key advantage for working in public rather than private schools. In the modern economy, where employers look to cut costs by employing people in casual and temporary jobs, permanency in public education is gold. Local schools, local decisions attacks permanency in 3 ways. Firstly, making schools use a staffing budget will cut permanent positions. Principals with their own permanency will not want to diminish permanent employment for colleagues, but a tightened budget will force them to do it. The choice will be between a permanent teacher at the top of the pay scale and a temporary teacher lower on the scale. Disregard transfers, disregard local selection on merit, disregard one's contribution to quality teaching and learning. Everyone will have a price tag on their heads, and more that will determine one's employment opportunities. Secondly, allowing schools the choice to fill permanent positions temporarily will reduce permanent employment. In Western Australia's so-called independent public schools, with this approach, 47% of jobs are now filled by temps. Thirdly, allowing schools to refuse the appointment of nominated transfers on an alternating basis will undercut permanency. This means the hundreds of teachers annually who lose their positions in a school because of falling enrolments will not be placed in a permanent position as currently applies. How long will they be parked on the payroll somewhere before they're sacked? No matter what reassurances the Director-General or Minister may give, how long do we think Treasury will tolerate the continuing employment of what they regard as excess employees? This is a blatant attack on teachers' employment security and prepares the ground for limited tenure, contract-based employment for all in the future. Given the scale and nature of these attacks on the rights and entitlements of students and teachers, Federation is urging all members to join this campaign. There is so much at stake for us, for our students, for a public education system that should be quality guaranteed by government.
Joan, is there anything on record that demonstrates the threats to permanency that Gary has described?
Yes, there is. The Minister has already stated to the media that a school may decide to trade in a deputy principal for a speech pathologist. It's more likely that if there isn't enough money in the school budget, promotions positions will have to be traded in. This already happens in Victoria. And this clip from the Minister demonstrates that it's entirely possible that large numbers, or even the majority of teachers, would no longer be permanent.
I'm confident that that principals want to have permanent staff working in their schools because they want certainty in terms of their staff for this year and for the years ahead so that they can do their appropriate planning. But we are going to give principals the power to make the decision as to whether they put on a new staff member as a permanent or as a casual.
How do the Every Student, Every School changes to support for students with disabilities and special needs fit in with the government's plans?
As we know from a secret Treasury expenditure review leaked last year, these changes are all about capping and reducing spending on students with additional learning needs, changing the funding methodology, reconfiguring 1,800 specialist support teacher positions into a generalist one-size-fits-all role, pushing for more integration into regular classes and cutting back on specialist teachers, classes and schools, expecting every teacher to teach every student with every disability and special need in a regular class setting. They're all designed to cap and reduce spending over time. As the business consultants have told the department, integration is cheaper than specialist provision. Our campaign on these issues clearly fits within the broader campaign against devolution.
For kids with special needs in mainstream classes, this could mean a loss of individual time and individual resourcing that they currently have.
I'm concerned that funding and resources for students in mainstream classes will no longer be matched to their individual level of need, as assessed by a very rigorous profile based on their learning, social and behavioural needs.
So has the profession itself had any involvement in the plans?
No. Much of the work is happening with high levels of secrecy, and the profession has been excluded from the local schools' local decisions steering committee. Indeed, the only 3 practising educators who sit on this steering committee are bound by confidentiality requirements not to reveal any details to even their own organisations. But what we have learned concerns us greatly. The department has contracted out the detailed planning on local schools' local decisions to one of the world's largest accountancy firms, PricewaterhouseCoopers, which has been working in Bridge Street for months.
What do we know about the sort of approach an accountancy firm like PwC takes?
We know the kind of approaches this company takes. After all, they undertook a review of employee-related costs for the department, revealed in secret Treasury documents that came into the possession of the Federation last year. PricewaterhouseCoopers specialises in transaction services, business recovery services, corporate finance, business valuations, sustainability, crisis management, actuarial advice and enterprise risk management. You'd be hard-pressed to find the words students, curriculum, pedagogy, teaching, learning or syllabuses anywhere on their website. Yet this firm is undertaking the development of detailed proposals around the staffing and resources of our schools. It makes an absolute mockery of the Premier's description of local schools, local decisions as education reform. There's only one reason why our government calls in the accountants rather than education experts.
What specific work is being done?
A resource allocation model is being developed by PricewaterhouseCoopers. It is essentially two buckets of money that each school will get. One will be a non-staffing budget or bucket, the other will be a staffing budget. Every purchase will come from one bucket, everyone employed will be determined by the other bucket. Currently, staffing formulae based around enrolments, class sizes and curriculum determine the number and mix of staff. The model being developed will have the principal, with one eye on the staffing budget, determine the number of staff and the types of positions. A resource allocation model already exists in the New South Wales TAFE system with devastating consequences.
Earlier this week, I talked to a Federation Vice President and TAFE head teacher Jeff Turnbull about the impact the TAFE resource allocation model has on his decision making, courses available for students and class sizes in TAFE.
I'm given a budget for my section and I have to stay within that budget. The size of that budget is determined by a number of factors. The budget allocated to my institute and in turn the budget allocated to my college. I then receive my budget. It's also determined by the courses I have run in the previous semester based on the institute's profile and on an hourly rate based on the lowest hourly rate per student across other TAFE institutes that also deliver those courses. This doesn't take into account the special needs of my students or their socio-economic background. If my students need extra support or special mentoring, I have to meet that cost within the budget that I'm given. This could mean that I have to reduce the number of subjects that I offer to enable me to stay within the budget. If the demand for courses exceeds the allocated budget, then that demand is not met. I'm often told that my hourly rate is too high compared with other institutes. Whilst I would never do this, I know that in some cases class sizes have been increased to lower the hourly rate.
Joan, we've already discussed the implications for teachers' careers, jobs and salaries, but this is about more than teachers, isn't it?
It certainly is. The working conditions of teachers directly impact on the learning conditions of our students. More than 20,000 teachers are due to retire over the next 5 years. The government must provide security for teachers so that every student has the security of being offered a broad curriculum taught by appropriately qualified teachers.
And class sizes?
It's really important for our students that our staffing agreement includes class sizes. This agreement will only last 2 more terms. While the department has said class sizes policies will continue, they won't be enforceable. The Commission of Audit has specifically referred to kindergarten class size limits and stated that these limits should be applied flexibly and altered as needed to reflect changing circumstances or the emergence of new evidence or best practice.
Why might class sizes go up? Surely early years class sizes were reduced because it was proven what a difference lower class sizes make to learning outcomes.
That's right, and it was recognised when the campaign for lower class sizes was won. However, if there's not enough money in the budget, a principal may have no choice but to increase class sizes. The government won't take the blame because they'll say the principal or the school made the choice.
If principals are forced to cut teacher and head teacher positions, then how can we provide students with the subjects that they want and need?
I currently teach 24 students in Year 1, and I'm really worried that if we've decreased funding, there's no limit to the number of students that will be in my class.
The most important thing for me is being worried about how many kids I'll have in my class. I'm in a rural setting, I've got a big class as it is, and it worries me that I won't be able to cater for those kids if there's no limit on the class sizes.
So what can we do about this?
We've got to let parents know that the government's attacks on the salaries and security of teachers will impact on the size of their child's class, what their child is taught, and whether their child is taught by an appropriately qualified teacher. When the last coalition government tried to force a similar agenda on schools, we worked really closely with parents and our communities to defeat this agenda, and we can do this again.
But aren't we fighting against overwhelming odds?
No, Sally, we're not. And we won't be alone in this fight. The government has attacked all public sector workers. It has tried to limit the ability of the Industrial Relations Commission to protect workers, while at the same time trying to increase sanctions and penalties against unions. We'll work together with nurses, police, firefighters and other unions to maintain workers' rights. That's how we defeated work choices. And we'll fight together with our communities to maintain the highest quality public services.
I want to guarantee that women in their childbearing years or a woman that is pregnant will not be overlooked for promotions positions or employment altogether.
I teach at a K-2 infant school. We specialise in infants education for children. My concern is the closure of my school, which is in 1.6 kilometres of the nearest public school, as a mechanism to save money.
As a teacher mentor, I support teachers in their first 5 years, and I'm really worried that this program will be one of the first to be cut. My concern is evaluations have shown that this is one of the most valuable programs that the department has put forward.
I want the children in my school's individual learning needs to be able to be met by a teacher that best fits them, not someone who best fits the budget.
Thank you, Maury, Gary and Joan. Several important events have happened since the previous discussion and reports. Maury will now provide an update.
Earlier this week, the Federation received a letter from the Minister for Education in response to our demand for guarantees. Executive carefully considered the Minister's response. However, in that letter, he failed to provide the guarantees that are needed, guarantees that are enforceable under industrial law. The Minister's letter and a paragraph-by-paragraph response by the Federation is available on our website. A further development this week has been an attempt by the government to seek orders in the Industrial Relations Commission to prevent these meetings from occurring. The IRC would not grant the department the orders. Indeed, the IRC gave directions to the department to reconsider its refusal to involve the Federation in the steering committee.
Finally, Maury will now move the recommendation you have at your meeting. This will be seconded and debate will continue at your venue.
Colleagues, the profession is meeting this morning across New South Wales in over 130 venues in country and city locations, in tiny rural communities, regional centres and large city venues. We are meeting today because, as the recommendation states, the future of the public education system is at stake. The attempt by the government to market the most radical and extreme restructure in its history as school autonomy will not be bought by the profession. As the recommendation highlights, the New South Wales Treasury is setting the agenda in order to fulfil its wish to reduce public expenditure. And in public schools, the cost of employing staff is the major concern of Treasury. This is why the government continues to impose its 2.5% salary cap on teachers. Can I suggest to everyone that every time your pay slip arrives that you write the letters LSLD, local schools, local decisions, across your pay slip before you toss it into a drawer. This will be your fortnightly reminder from the department as to what local schools, local decisions is about. The cost of employing staff in our schools. Not content with the salary cap, they need to make even greater savings in perpetuity. The only way this can occur is by reducing the number of permanent positions, whether that be a classroom, an executive or a specialist position, and by removing staffing formulae based on student numbers, curriculum and class sizes. And ultimately, it will be our students whose learning opportunities will be threatened or compromised. And costs are also the reason why the department wants to abolish the incremental scale. You will see in the dot points what is under threat. No member of the profession will remain unaffected. We attract and retain people in teaching by giving them permanency, security of employment, a professional salary, incremental adjustments, opportunities for career advancement and a chance to move back home after teaching in difficult to staff areas. These are the very guarantees that will be scrapped under local schools' local decisions. It would be almost impossible to develop a worse policy mix than this at a time when we may be facing our greatest teacher shortage. I want to speak directly to my principal colleagues who are listening to this broadcast today. I believe principals will be required to shoulder the burden under what is being proposed. This is not about empowering anyone other than the State Treasurer. It is perhaps the greatest centralisation of power and control over what schools will be able to afford to do that we have ever seen. Each principal will be forced to make decisions based not on school or student needs, but on budgets determined centrally. With no additional resources, no staffing guarantees, class sizes deregulated, principals will be forced to cannibalise within existing resources just to make ends meet. Principals will be merely empowered to rob Peter to pay Paul. No wonder the department wants to have less emphasis in principal selection criteria on educational leadership and more emphasis on commercial acumen. Given the size of the restructure, the Federation calls on the government to stop acting in haste and in secrecy. If we cannot get the guarantees locked up in enforceable agreements, then the profession will intensify the campaign using every resource at our disposal, including, if necessary, further industrial action. So now is the time for the Minister to intervene. We call upon the government to review what has happened over the last few months, to pause and to begin again, but this time with the profession involved. How about the Minister asks the accountants to vacate their chairs, leave the room, and in their place invite in representatives of the teaching service, including the Federation. The recommendation asks each school to keep this campaign alive, and if carried, will require every school in New South Wales to form a campaign committee to drive this campaign at the local level. After all, who is the union? You are the union. It does not exist in any other place. Every member is the union, and every member is being asked now to commit to a campaign to defend the very future and integrity of our great system. We owe it to our students, we owe it to our schools, we owe it to each other, but we also owe it to the future generations of young people, our students, and those who will be entering this great profession of ours. How dare any one of us sit back at this time in our history and allow the guarantees around working conditions and student learning opportunities to be removed, the very improvements that previous generations of teachers and principals have fought for. We have been involved in difficult campaigns before against seemingly unbeatable odds, but we learn from our own proud history. Our strength, our integrity, and our commitment to the students in our schools means that we can prevail. I ask for your support and urge you to carry the proposition in every venue across New South Wales.